Welcome all of you. Today we are going to deal with some of the translation problems. Personal problems in translation are these problems which confront the average translator. Such personal problems are not, of course, the result of any conscious bias against his task or the content of the message. Rather, they are largely unconscious predispositions about translation procedures which tend to color his work and ultimately impair the effectiveness of much that he may honestly be attempting to do. Perhaps some of the most important problems may be stated in terms of the relationships of the translator to the subject matter, the receptor language, the nature of communication, and the procedures which he should use. Let's start with too much knowledge of the subject matter as one of the problems which may face the translator. When it is emphasized repeatedly that the translator must be complete master of the subject matter, it may seem inconceivable that too much knowledge of the subject matter can be a deterrent to effective translation. In fact, it is actually not the excess of knowledge but the incapacity for imagination which hampers translators at this point. Translators know so much about the subject that they unconsciously assume the readers will also know what they do, when the result is that they are frequently translating over the heads of their audience. Let's deal with taking translation ease for granted as one of the major problems of translation. Under the impact of the wholesale translation of textbooks and other similatory materials, a kind of translation ease has arisen in many parts of the world. This form of language is often accepted, especially by educated nationals, as the only possible medium for communicating materials which have first been expressed in a foreign language. Since scholars have often had to read a good deal of such material, they come to accept it more and more as a kind of literary standard. Insecurity about one's own language is one of the problems which may face the translator. Without realizing it, some persons have a deep sense of insecurity about their own language. This may express itself in two almost opposite tendencies. In the first place, some national writers feel obliged to imitate the forms of other languages, which they regard as having more prestige. Hence, they borrow wholesale not only words, idioms, and stylistic devices, but even grammatical forms, for they conclude that these prestigious languages must be right. Desire to preserve the mystery of language is one of such problems of translation. Some people, that is, national and foreign, genuinely feel that if the text to be translated is made fully clear, something of the mystery will be lost. In a sense, this is true if one conceives of mystery in a strictly non-religious sense. Ignorance of the nature of translation is also one of the problems of translation. That is to say, simple ignorance of what translation is all about. Because the average person naively thinks that language is words, the common tacit assumption results that translation involves replacing a word in language A with a word in language B. And the more conscientious this sort of translator is, the more acute the problem. In other words, the traditional focus of attention in translation was on the word.